Hi, welcome. It's being dubbed as the toughest US presidential election to call this century. A combative Donald Trump faces off against Kamala Harris, who has managed to make waves and ruffle feathers in the short time that she's been campaigning. It's a close fight to call, to say the very least, and one that has repercussions for the global economy and markets. What you're probably wondering is why it should matter to you. What would a Trump victory mean for us sitting on the other side of the globe? Would a Kamala Harris administration be more favorable towards India? This is US Election Watch with Ramesh Damani, and this is your one stop to get answers to all of those questions. Ramesh, thanks so much. And it's a pleasure for me to be on your show.
Thank you, Alex, so much. Thank you for inviting me for this very special show that you're doing.
So let me set the context, because a lot of people who are familiar with you and with your views on Indian markets will be wondering, why is Ramesh Damani talking about US elections? But it so happens that you've been an avid student of the US presidential elections for very long. What drew you to it?
Yeah, Alex, as they say, there are Bollywood buffs and there are stamp collectors and there are selfie collectors. I like to follow US. I remember when I was very young, 10, 12 years old, my father would take me to the US library, which happened to be in Marine Lines near my house at that time. I would spend hours reading US magazines and periodicals. And I developed an interest in the US political process, and especially the presidential election, which is a direct election for one of the most powerful offices in the world. And I think that taste never left me. So I went back and studied almost every presidential election since the 1948, when Truman, in an upset, beat Dewey in the election there. So since 48 to now, almost 75 years, I've been following, reading, and thinking about the US election. So it's an extraordinary opportunity to come and share my wisdom with you. Thank you.
So I'm glad, and there is a lot of nuance to it, and it's very, very different from the Indian political system. And a lot of people need to understand that at the start before we delve into the details of what are the key moving parts in this election. So let's talk about that at the onset. How does the US presidential election differentiate itself from the Indian election?
Yeah, great question, Alex. They always, whenever you meet an Indian diplomat or American diplomat, we thump our chest and say, we're the oldest democracy, we're the biggest democracy, so we love to compare the similarities we have. And it is a democratic process in America that unfolds every 4 years for the presidency, and in India every 5 years. And they are truly great spectacles of mankind, the unfolding of the election, so many millions of people voting, peacefully transferring of power. But there are also some significant differences. In India, we have a republic where the person, the prime minister, is elected from the MPs. So in effect, indirectly, there's not a direct election of the prime minister. You elected the MPs, and then the leader of the largest party traditionally is elected as the prime minister of the country.
Right.
America is a more direct election. People actually vote for the candidate they want, which are the two major parties. They're Democratic and Republican Party. So they alternate almost between power, going to Democrats and Republicans. But instead of not being a nationwide contest, what it is a 50-state electoral battle. So there are 50 different contests that you win, not one national contest, but 50 contests. And each contest has some electoral votes assigned to it. And the winner of the magic number of 270 electoral votes is elected the next president of the United States. In India, to become prime minister, you need a simple majority of 272.
Yes.
So even the numbers are fairly close between US and India.
Yeah.
But there are different systems. It's a great quadrennial exercise in electing the most powerful person in the world. And it is done not on one national level, though you vote directly for the presidential candidate. It's done on 50 states, from California to New York, from Maine to Texas, on a state-by-state basis. And usually, the winner of the state, if you win the popular vote by even 1 vote or 10 votes, you get the entire electoral vote for that country. So it's a very intense competition that goes on.
I see why the last couple of elections, or last few elections here in India, have been more so compared with the US presidential election, because it's been led by personalities. Yeah. And that is what it is in the US as well. It has been for some time. This time around, it's been a little different, because for the longest time you had the incumbent, President Joe Biden, that stood up and said, I'm going to run this election. And you had Donald Trump, who was his usual combative self, and he demonstrated that in the first debate, completely trouncing Joe Biden. And ultimately, I remember we were talking about this when this happened. He said, it has to happen. He has to hang up his spurs, so to speak. Were you expecting that?
It's unprecedented, but I think after the debate unfolded and Biden performed so poorly, there was just enormous pressure. In America, the pressure comes not necessarily from pollsters, but typically from the donors. And the donors just stopped contributing to the Democratic causes. And that was orchestrated in many parts by a Machiavellian Speaker of the US House, Nancy Pelosi, who told the donors stop giving. And ultimately, if you don't get money, all politics is the mother's milk. So if you don't get, you can't run a campaign. So Biden kind of saw the writing on the wall, and it's unprecedented. What he did has never happened in UN history, that after clinching the nomination, he decided to voluntarily step down from the presidency. It's unprecedented, but what has amazed me is how fast Kamala Harris has stepped up to the plate, and in almost 24 hours she took charge, changed the Biden-Harris committee to the Harris committee, and now is, of course, even leading a little bit.
We'll talk about that in just a bit, but I'm curious what you think about President Joe Biden's decision to do what he did. In your opinion, do you think that he did the right thing, and do you think that it was done too late?
Probably a bit too late. I think what some analysts in America wrote, that after he was elected for the first term as this transitional president, he should have written a note and sealed it and given to the chief of staff. Say, I'm not going to run for the second term. The reason you don't say that early on is that you become a lame duck. People don't take you seriously because you can't run again, so who cares? So to avoid that, he should just put in a sealed envelope, give it to the chief of staff. So you say, I made up the decision 4 years back. But I think, people don't quit being an aide in the White House. So how do you quit being the president, the most powerful position on earth? The Air Force One, fleet of cars, the White House, the power, the prestige. It's very hard to give up. You get power is an aphrodisiac, as you know, and the U.S. presidential power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. You can literally, change the course of history by the actions you take at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So I'm not surprised, but I think the writing was on the wall. He would have been truly old, and I think the debate proved that he was not, he still maybe loses train of thought, maybe stumbles a little bit, but he still has a coherent policy. But the U.S. is also about public relations, also about razzmatazz. While Trump's policy is sometimes crazy in my view. Some of the things he talks economic make no sense to me. But he yet speaks a mean language, speaks to his base. So, that's the way the U.S. politics is. Am I not surprised after the debate? No. Frankly, it was almost on the cards.
Okay, let's come to the here and now. And we're a month away from the D-Day when things really start ramping up. And I guess it's the last mile for the two candidates as well. What are the stakes right now? And let's first talk about the two participants before we move to all of the other entities that will be watching this very closely.
Yeah, I think for Indians it's fascinating. Of course, Trump is a known quantity in India. He's visited India. He's hosted Modi in Houston for this big rally that took place. So he's a fairly known quantity. In fact, he has some developments in Bombay bearing his name, Trump Towers, whatever. So he's somewhat of a known quantity in India. Kamala Harris is of Indian ancestry, but she's not that well known because her mother immigrated in the 60s to America, joined the civil rights movement, got married, and Kamala has really been, half Jamaican, half Indian. And while she likes a masala dosa, that's about the only part of Indian heritage that is acknowledged by her. But what fascinates me this time, and it's very hard for me to believe, that in 10 Downing Street, for example, we had Rishi Sunak, who became Prime Minister of Great Britain, a country that ruled us for almost 2 centuries. An Indian became Prime Minister, Indian ancestry became Prime Minister of that country. In American politics also, surprisingly, there are almost 4 candidates that had a say in the US presidential election. Let me enumerate them to you. There was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy, who took on Trump in the primaries and actually made a name for himself with his outspoken views on Trump, outspoken views on immigration in the US economy. Didn't get much, but got a lot of splash in the press. Nikki Haley, who was the last person standing against Trump, and finally she had to bow down to the inevitable fact that Trump would have won. So she stayed on and endorsed him finally.
Right.
But as the last person standing, she was from Indian immigrant stock from Punjab. I think she converted to Christianity, but Vivek Ramaswamy remains a Hindu by tradition. On the Democratic side, we have Kamala Harris, of course, who belongs to this Indian mother from Chennai, which is fabulous. And what is more interesting is the US vice presidential nomination for the Republic, a guy called Vance. His wife happens to be an Indian immigrant,
Absolutely.
Usha,
Yeah.
who was born there. So a lot of Indian connections in this. And I will add this point. A lot of us, chess beats say, look, Indians are doing so well. We're running Adobe, we're running IBM, we're running Oracle, we're running the Downing Street, we're running now Pennsylvania Avenue. I think that's more a tribute to their societies of how open and how meritocracy-based they are, that if you're good, you'll rise to the top. So I salute those societies for giving immigrant and immigrant children a point to rise even to the highest office of their land.
Speaking of meritocracy, and this is, if it does occur, would be historic in so many ways for the US as a nation. The first time in their history that a woman president is elected. How significant would that be?
What's interesting is when Hillary was running for president in the 2016 cycle and she lost against Trump, she was really playing the card, the gender card, the breaking of the glass ceiling card, the first woman card, really playing it, milking it for all it's worth. Kamala's not doing that. She's just running as a competent president. And that happens to be the side benefits that go along to it. Because she realized that's not an endearing strategy with the US electorate. To say the first woman, you don't want to vote for the first woman or vote for a quota. You want to vote for who's the most competent person to be the US president. So I think she's playing a sharper game, a smarter strategy than Hillary Clinton done that. And I think a surge in the poll is now benefiting that strategy.
Are they neck and neck?
It's very, very close. I mean, just to give you an idea that there are 50 states in America and all have electoral votes. The important ones being New York with 30 electoral votes and California with 54 and Texas with 40. So you have to get together 270 electoral votes in order to win the majority. There are scenarios in which you could be tied at 269, 269. So it's a pretty unlikely scenario, but it does get tied. But here's the important thing, Alex, that in the last 20 years or so, there have been many elections in America where the person who's won the popular vote has lost the electoral vote and hence not become president. For example, in Gore versus Bush, in the first round, Bush lost the popular vote, but he won the electoral vote, so he became president. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by a wide margin, but lost the electoral college vote, so she became president. Typically, it has worked that whoever wins the popular vote wins the electoral vote. But increasingly now, because of the tightness of the race, we are finding that people who win the electoral college don't necessarily win the popular vote. And that's particularly true of Republicans, who have wide support, but Democrats have very dense support on the coast. So they get huge majorities, but they don't carry all the states. So how close is the election? According to polls, if Biden and Trump were running, I think Trump would have handily won. He was almost measuring the drapes to the White House even before the election.
And the winning song and all of that.
Yes, absolutely. But Trump caught him by surprise. Kamala caught him by surprise. She surged the poll. The Democrats came back.
The debate took place.
Yeah, the debate took place in which she did apparently very well. And the public started, the Democratic base, that was going away from Biden, started coming back to her. And of course, money is so important. She's outraising Trump almost 2-1, 3-1 in the last 3 months. So she's doing a great job. Plus, she has support of a lot of celebrities from Oprah to Taylor Swift, so whatever. So it's a very close election. It's come down to basically 7 states in America. Out of 50 states, 7 that count. And they're basically the Midwestern states, which is Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, the Blue Wall, and the Sun Belt states, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Georgia.
These are called swing states, Ramesh?
Yeah.
And, okay, I was going to ask you about swing states. Explain the concept of these swing states, why they're so important, and have there traditionally been swing states? Are there more this year than before?
Well, typically what happens is that even before the election starts, there's some states that automatically go into the Democratic column, some the Republican column. For example, California and New York, in the last 40 years, have almost typically voted Democrat. So Democrats start with that electoral base of 55 plus 28 seats. And Republicans start with generally Ohio, Texas, Florida. They seem to fall naturally in the path. And the rest states vote very predictable. The Midwestern states, not Midwestern, but the Western states, Utah, Colorado, Kansas, are very heavily Republican. So Democrats are very strong in the coastal elite states out there. But there are 5 or 7 states that are swing states that can swing either Democratic or Republican. and whoever carries them carries probably the presidency. I think the one state in America this time that is the closest and the most hard fought and most rich in electoral history is Pennsylvania. It has 19 electoral votes, and if you keep watching the newscast, you'll see Trump and Kamala Harris going there as frequently as possible because it's almost vital. The road to the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue goes through Pennsylvania this time. And if you get the 19 electoral votes, I think the odds of you becoming the next president, the 46th president, are very high in America.
There are a couple of events that have already taken place that are iconic in the presidential race. You have the attempt, the one major attempt on Trump's life. How significant do you think that that's going to be in the context of him pushing for power? And do you think that that's going to sway a portion of the populace?
You're right that when he got the election, he had the famous foot with his fist. Yeah. We thought it was done that day, and then of course, you know, the world changed when Biden resigned a few days later. But in America, there's a well-established political tradition of what's called the October surprise, and events take place in October, which sometimes the president can mold because he's the president. He can sit in the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, direct a war, direct a peace. The most famous one I'll give you, for example, in 1972, when Nixon was running for re-election, Henry Kissinger came breathless a few days before to the State Department and announced peace is at hand, which means the North Vietnam conflict will be over, and he suddenly got a surge in popularity. In October, the hostage crisis took place in 80 when Jimmy Carter was running. So US presidents have a large ability to influence election. And this time, what's going on, there are two major conflicts going on around the world. There's the Ukrainian conflict, which has been ongoing with Russia, and then Israel, Hezbollah,
the West Asia
conflict going on. And who knows how that works out. Can Biden get a peace agreement and become very popular all of a sudden? Or will some damage take place which will destroy the popularity of the incumbent administration? So October surprises are what keeps us on the edge in America. And it has kept us on the edge for the last 30 years. And probably will keep us for the next election round too. So
you mentioned it. I was curious about what you think about this as well, because it comes down to legacy, I guess, to a certain extent. Joe Biden making a statement not too long back that there's still the U.S. is still supportive up to the hilt of Israel. There are certain contentions being made about the way that this war is being handled by Israel. There have been calls for moderation, there have been calls for de-escalation that has not taken place. Seemingly, we're also trying to find out what the extent of this is going to be sitting here in India. What, according to you, is the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, and how this will play out?
Well, I think clearly nobody knows. I mean, war is unpredictable, as you know. Who knows tomorrow if Iranian missile hits a population center in Israel, or some more hostages are taken. It could change the contours of the war. It couldn't do that. I think it's more better for us in India to talk about the economic policies. I think 2-3 hot button issues in America. Alex, of course, is abortion. The Supreme Court rejected Roe v. Wade, which allowed US women the right to legally take abortion across America. Big emotive issue. So the women are lining up for the Democrats. Republicans are on the back foot on this. The Trumpian economic policy seems a bit crazy to me. America, for the land of the free, home of the brave, get people in, lift up the whole world by the policy of allowing export, preference for exports. Trump is not talking about putting tariffs on everything, not necessarily from China, but from all over the world, which in effect will raise the cost of living.
And he's driving economic policy by that.
He is driving economic policy. And, you know, I'm not sure that's the best policy to do. But if Trump comes back to power, he'll be almost an unchecked emperor in America, because after so much negative press and all the media being against him, if he's re-elected, you know, he has a very strict agenda, which is anti-immigration, which is not good for India, pro-tariffs, which is again not good for India and the world. So I'm not sure, you know, how the world will look if Trump came back. I think Kamala Harris would be a more easily understandable policy, and she will wield American policy with, you know, a soft stick rather than Trump, who has promised brute force.
Okay, so you've explained what it would mean for us sitting in India as well. But from the global context, Ramesh, also policy on economics, right? Where you're talking about a certain response to the pandemic, you're talking about certain responses to economic pulls and pushes in terms of the size of the US debt. Have you thought that the Biden administration has managed things better than the Trump presidency is? And which of the two do you think would be able to manage all of the moving parts heading into the next 4 years?
Fascinating question. I mean, debt and deficits has been, in 92, George Bush versus Clinton. And Bush had stratospheric rating because he'd won the Gulf War out there. So Clinton knew if he had to win the election, he needed an emotive issue. So he came out with the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid."
Yeah.
He wanted to push back the economy out there, and he actually won election and then re-election based on his handling of the economy, as opposed to Bush, who was considered more of a foreign policy expert. So it is very important that the US election, they're feeling the pain of inflation over the last few years. So it is a very emotive issue for them. But no US president can ignore foreign policy because the US is the toughest, the biggest daddy on the stick. So let me give you an example. What happens if China tests the US and invades Taiwan? Trump has said, I'm going to hands-off policy. But Taiwan produces everything that's important in the world today, semiconductor chips. Yeah, how do you do that? I think, in my opinion, no US president can unilaterally withdraw from NATO or from defending Taiwan in case there's a threat from Russia or from China. And yet Trump promised to do that. So it's like he's selling the US for the highest bidder. You give me 2% of your defense budget, I'll support you, others I won't. So I think it's a fascinating exercise.
And certain statements also, sorry to interrupt, but to drive home the point, certain statements when Ukraine was being debated about how he was slighted by Zelensky.
Yeah, I mean, it's more personal. If you suck up or if you're, fawning over him, he tends to like you, like he likes Hungarian premier. If you're taking him on, you don't really like him. So it's a bit of an unknown quantity. The US is too big and important a player to run by the whims and fancy of a man. And yet we might be on the edge of that. I mean, the US election is so close, it could go either way. So it's going to be a fascinating few weeks.
Okay. What are you going to be watching most closely over the next 4 weeks? And we will be talking more over the course of the next month,
of course,
as we draw closer to the date. But what are the key events that you're going to be watching, Ramesh, over the course of the next 4 weeks?
See, the key events are over. They were the debates. The one debate between Kamala and Trump and the vice presidential debates.
Yeah.
Both were over, so that's done with, okay? So now it's the home stretch. So we worry first about the October surprise and how that plays out in America. What happens if the war gets worse, better? Does Biden manage to sign a peace deal, which would really help Kamala Harris? So we have to watch those kind of things. But the way to understand the US election is watch those 7 states I talked to you about. The blue wall, the Sun Belt states, Pennsylvania, with 19 electoral votes is probably the most important prize. If you get a sense of which way Pennsylvania is going, you're probably going to find the winner. So I think what you should watch is the 7 swing states, and within that, the most important, in my view, is Pennsylvania.
And if you can call that, then you can call the election.
Pretty much.
All right, Ramesh, thanks so much for letting me be a part of your show. It was an absolute pleasure. And that brings us to the end of this particular edition of the US Election Watch with Ramesh Damani. There's more lined up over the course of the next 4 weeks, I can promise you that, and you don't want to miss this. Do stay tuned. This is NDTV Profit.